Well, first of all, welcome everybody, I'm happy to help out with this. These girls got started, which is this webinar series, which is just awesome way to get our information out there and do a little educational stuff every week. I like the little short talks. You know, a lot of times I struggle with hour and 2 hour long seminars. The older I get, the harder time I have sitting still that long, I think. So I like this format really well. So I'm really happy to be here and talk with you guys about turf. And as most of my coworkers know, I spent a lot of time in turf in the private sector for about 22 years, I guess. I managed cool and warm season grasses. So you know, I can't say I'm the best turf guy in the world, but I can tell you how to kill it easier than I tell you how to grow it. I've made enough mistakes over the years that I've learned a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Let's see. All right. So first, you know, I saw on the poll that some people were unsure of whether they had cool season or warm season grasses. And that's probably the very first question we need to address when we talk about renovating in the fall. Warm season grasses, the way I remember them is warm season grasses love warm weather. Okay, so when would you typically renovate a warm season lawn? That would be right before warm weather starts or right as warm weather starts, so the beginning of the summer, because you need time for that grass to really root in and get to loving its new home or grow and develop root systems. And so you need the best time of year for that species. So 2 warm season grasses we grow in our lawns in Kentucky, and not near as common as cool season, which we'll talk about in a minute, but you do see them, Bermuda and zoysia grass. And anybody that's heard me speak on turf before knows I love zoysia grass. I think it's an underused grass in Western Kentucky in particular, but most of Kentucky, I would argue that's the case. So if you have zoysia or Bermuda grass, most of my timing today regarding renovation or fertility or even some other issues we'll talk about does not apply to you if you have zoysia or Bermuda. Now, some of the renovation topics we'll talk about will apply to you, but the timing will be off. Okay, so now is not the time to renovate warm season grasses. So today we're going to talk almost solely about cool season grasses, which include fescue, ryegrass, perennial rye and annual rye, bluegrass. There's creeping red fescue, and then some fine fescues, including creeping red. That we don't typically use all of those in our lawn, but sometimes you'll see some of them in mixes and seed mixes. So most likely you might have a little bit of perennial ryegrass in your lawn, or a little bit of bluegrass in your lawn, or even some creeping red fescue in some more shady areas in your lawn, very likely. So we're going to be talking about the cool season grasses as a whole. So I titled this presentation, Drought, Heat, My Lawn, because if anybody has grown and managed their lawn to a higher level than what my mother does, pretty much as long as it's green, I'm good. If you manage it at a higher level than that, then you know what I'm talking about. At the end of the summer, we take a look at our lawn, and it's often taken a beating through the summer, whether drought got it or heat, or because of drought and or heat and humidity, we've got some disease problems. Very likely we're seeing some of these problems right now. So, you know, we talked about one species here. Why does my lawn looking rough right now? And species is very important. Most home lawns in Western Kentucky in particular, but most of Kentucky, usually have fescue, a cool season fescue grass that likes cooler weather. It likes less humidity. It likes plenty of moisture, but not too much moisture. And grows fairly well, not too bad. Now the problem is you know, you can get it really healthy and looking good coming into the summer, and then how well you've prepped that grass in the fall and the winter and the spring, and how well you've maintained it and followed best practices will determine how well that fescue will come through a tough summer. So a lot of times this time of year, we're looking pretty rough, like this picture kind of shows you. It's pretty thin, and it looks like we may have had some disease problems hitting some of it. And what happens when disease or heat and drought take out some of our fescue? We get weeds that pop into those open spots, correct? So we see a lot of these summer annuals and even summer perennials that are popping in, like plantains, buckhorn plantains, and lespedeza, and all kinds of different weeds that pop in. Dandelions, crabgrass is probably one of the #1 warm season weeds that moves into our lawn, and my lawn's a perfect example. Any weak area in my lawn, I have an abundance of crabgrass right now. So there are other things that cause our lawns to fail, and that includes poor soils and poor fertility, improper maintenance practices, or too much traffic. You know, when you're sick at home with the flu or something, you know, it's if you're really hard on your body and you continue to try to work and you continue to be physical, active wise, sometimes it's harder on you. It really brings you down even more. And our lawns are the same way. If there are fescue lawns going through a hot summer, and they get beat up pretty good if you continue to walk all over them, unless your dog's digging them, and you got 18 grandkids and they're running all through the backyard. And so we got to watch too much traffic on stressed turf. Water is a whole nother topic we could do a whole nother little talk on, but typically fescue, it may go a little dormant in a drought time, but you typically don't have to water fescue a whole lot. If you're okay and comfortable with it going into a kind of a dormant stage during the summer if it gets really dry. Most of the time, as soon as we get some rain, it bounces back within a day or two and gets its green color back. So watering is a huge topic when we talk about stressed turf. And Mother Nature in general, you know, as we all know, with diseases, fungal diseases in particular, if a grass is under stress, it's going to be more susceptible to these diseases than any other time. It can't fight it off. And when we're under Mother Nature stresses like heat and humidity or drought, that's the perfect time for disease to move in and really cause some damage and some havoc. So once again, I back up, how we maintain our fescue in the good months, in the fall, the winter, and the spring, how we maintain it, how we treat it, determines how well our home lawns will make it through a hot, dry summer. So real quick, a quick list of some commonly cultivated turfgrass species. And as I said before, we are mainly talking about tall fescue, okay? And let me be careful when I say tall fescue. We're really talking about a turf type tall fescue. Kentucky 31 is a tall fescue. It's not a turf type tall fescue, and it's not a good grass for your lawn. It's a clump grass. It gets a lot of diseases pretty easily when we're mowing it low. And some people have tried to argue with me on this, and mostly, you know, some older people that grew up with Kentucky 31, and we still use it in waterways on farms and in ditches and roadsides and so forth. It does a lot better if it's not mowed regularly. It doesn't succumb to some disease problems. It builds deeper roots and tolerates drought a little better. But when we put it in our lawn and we mow Kentucky 31 and we mow it lower and we mow regularly, it doesn't tolerate all that quite as well. So we have a lot of other turf type tall fescue varieties out there that tolerate all that a whole lot better. So we know if we back up and talk about all of our, why does our lawn possibly look so bad right now? One of them is poor soils, and this one is the one that's very difficult to overcome. In Western Kentucky, we have a lot of clay, and that clay stays too wet for too long, and then when it dries out, it is dry. It doesn't. It's like a rock. So we struggle with soil here in Western Kentucky and turf. And a lot of times that's kind of the root of a lot of our problems. Not a really good way if you've got an acre lawn and you've got some poor clay soil. There's not a great way really to amend that, not economically speaking, and definitely not if we're just talking labor. It's extremely difficult and expensive. So we have to kind of deal with whatever soil type we have and move past that as best we can. But when it comes to fertility, we can manage that very, very well. And of course, as we preach all the time through the Extension Office, a good soil sample lets us know where we're at on this chart. And 6.5 to 7.0, somewhere right in there is the perfect range. However, Fescue does fairly well, all the way down to 6 and all the way up to 7.3 or something. It'll tolerate a pretty wide range compared to a lot of plants. So I'm not too worried if your soil sample comes in at 7.0 or if it comes in at 5.8. I'm not super worried. Can we make it a little better? We can. And when we talk renovation time, which I haven't even spoken about that, but the best time to renovate cool season lawns is before or after this whole summer, after the stress period. We can look at renovation, which is September. That's when we start seeing cooler nights, cooler days, and that's the time to do it. The ideal time, somewhere around mid-September, 1st of September, somewhere right in that range. So we're right there. So right now is a time that you should get a soil sample. Let's figure out where you're at, and let's get this right. This is a fairly inexpensive way to get our pH correct, make sure we have potassium and phosphorus at the right levels, and let's get that going before we renovate. So, you know, we preach this all the time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but taking a soil sample in your lawn is pretty simple. We like a random sample. So you go around your lawn and you go an inch deep, inch and a half deep, somewhere in that range, 2 inches, and you get a little sample of soil, as you see here. And that's a soil probe we're using to take this, but you can use a little shovel. I really don't want the grass on top, so the first ½ inch grass and thatch, I don't care about that so much. I want the soil here, and that's what we'll send off to the lab and test. You need about a pint. Bring it by your extension office, drop it off, and we'll get the results, and we can help figure out exactly what fertility program you need before you start renovating this fall. When we talk about fertility needs, I always like to talk about different types of fertilizer. So there's 2 major types. There's ag grade fertilizer, which is your 10-10-10, 12-12-12, 19-19-19. It's just your basic nutrients, and that works fine for a lawn, no problem at all. You can step up your game a little bit with some of these other products, like the Scott's Turf Builder or the Osmocote Plus, or there's 100 other out there that have different analysis, like 15-9-12, or they have a lot of additives sometimes, or coatings on the fertilizer, and that helps the fertilizer feed longer and slower, or it helps it break down quicker. There's all kind of marketing to some of this, but realize your standard ag grade fertilizers will provide the necessary nutrients for your lawn to do well. I always say be careful of overfeeding. We don't want to overfeed our lawns, and so the best time to do your fertility on cool season lawns is definitely the fall. Let's get our P and K, our phosphorus and potassium, let's get it right about the time we're renovating. Either right before or right after is fine, but that's when we want to adjust those levels. Nitrogen, which is the first number in that analysis, 10-10-10, 10% nitrogen. We want to put that nitrogen down probably after we seed a few weeks, And we like a little cooler weather. Nitrogen can burn, and I don't like putting it on brand new seedlings really early. So let's wait just a little bit after it comes up and gets going, and then let's put down some nitrogen. And you can do another application of nitrogen in maybe November, and you'll see the benefits in the spring from fall feeding. Now, one of the other problems we talk about why our lawn is failing is maintenance. And all these you have a lot of control over. Height of cut being one of the number ones. If you're cutting your fescue too low, whether it's Kentucky 31 or turf type tall fescue, either one, you know, we like to cut that stuff at 3 inches or even above 3 inches. I cut my lawn at home at 3.5, and my wife doesn't like it very well. You know, it's kind of tall and a little shaggy looking sometimes when it gets between mowings. But it is much healthier at 3.5 inches than it would be at 2 or 2.5 inches. And we also kind of prevent some of the weed problems, which is a lot of times at the end of the summer our biggest reason why we need to look at renovation. So let's manage that height of cut, and we do that also with how often we cut. So mow it regularly so you don't have piles of clippings. That will kill some grass if you have piles of clippings. And then, of course, keeping sharp blades on your mower, hugely important. Sharp blades prevent disease, help prevent disease, and it just makes for a much nicer, cleaner cut also. Water requirements, you know, most homeowners here in Western Kentucky, we don't have irrigation on our lawns, so we have to rely on Mother Nature to provide the water it needs. But I'll add this, whether you have irrigation or whether you're putting out some pull-around sprinklers, be really careful. Water in the morning, early in the morning, not in the evening, so your grass doesn't stay wet all night. And water deeply. If you're watering every 2 or 3 days, you're watering too often. You should be able to water about once a week or once every 10 days, and water really deeply and infrequently. As we already talked about, manage your fertility. If you fertilize a lot of nitrogen in the spring, right before summer, you're setting that grass up to be very susceptible to disease problems. So let's lay off the nitrogen in the spring. About the latest I would like to see anybody fertilizing their fescue lawns is maybe end of April, something like that. There's no reason to put any nitrogen on it after that. And then aerification is a great practice, and I think we'll talk about that a little more here in a minute. And then traffic tolerance, as we talked about, trying to keep some traffic off of it in high stress times. There's a fescue lawn that has gone dormant, and it's okay. This actually greened right back up about a week later when we got a rain. So it looks pretty rough right now, but it's very healthy and just physiologically went into dormancy because it was so dry. But that's okay. Not a problem. Now, let's get into the nuts and bolts of thing. You know, so my lawn's looking kind of rough, and I'm trying to decide, you know, do I need to renovate this thing? Do I need to overseed, or do I need to spray it all and kill it all and then start back fresh with brand new? Well, here's your basic decision making that you have to make is look at your lawn, and if you're 50% weeds or bare areas, then you probably ought to look at a total renovation and not just a partial. If you're less than 50% weeds, you're mostly your preferred grass, fescue, then we can overseed and renovate. And it's a little easier and a little less expensive to overseed and thicken your lawn up and control the weeds if you're less than 50%. Okay, so don't let the bulldozer scare you. I've never seen a lawn that really needed a bulldozer in there. That's just a little dramatic effect for you there. So whether we overseed or whether we do a total kill and go back fresh, all brand new, you still have a lot of pre-plant procedures you need to do. And one we talked about is a soil sample, but I want you to take a look at your lawn right now though. if you're getting ready to renovate, take a look and let's identify some problems. First, identify if we need to do some fertility modifications, and let's look for any slopes in the yard that we might need to look at for erosion control. And if we're going to kill all the grass and weeds on it now, you're going to end up with open soil. And so let's make sure we're not going to have some washout problems, and let's plan for that. Let's start selecting what variety of grass we want to put on it. Hopefully you do not choose Kentucky 31. Hopefully you pick a turf type tall variety. And there's 100 of them out there. There's 1,000 of them out there. Falcon is a very popular one. You see at a lot of local box stores and so forth, and farm supply stores. That's a very good one. But there's a bunch more out there that are also very, very good. I always like to take a minute and talk about blends also. Sometimes companies will choose the turf type tall fescue variety and they'll add it with a couple of other varieties. And the reason they do this is they'll pick one variety that really performs well under drought conditions, and they'll pick another one that is very dense and very thick. And maybe they pick another one because it's a really deep green color. And so sometimes we get a benefit out of blending those seeds and sowing our lawn in that. And that's a perfect way to do it also. I used blends for many years in the golf business and had great luck using blends. So don't feel like you have to just get a single cultivar or a single variety of turf type tall fescue. It's okay if you find a blend, and it'll do fine for you. And then we have to talk about, okay, we've selected our grass and we've done our fertility test, and we've looked at modifying our P and K levels, and maybe we had to add a little lime to get our pH up or what have you. Now it's time to talk about how do we get this seed down and applied in the best way we can and to have the most success, okay? Because Mother Nature governs everything, so we want to give it as best chance as we can, and make sure we do it as best we can, basically, and knowing that Mother Nature may throw a little wrench in it, but that's why I talk about any slopes. We need to plan for that a little bit, because if you get a 2 or 3 inch rain and you've opened your soil up in some form, you'll lose your seed at best case scenario. Worst case scenario, we've developed some ruts and we've got to go back and fill in, and it's a lot of work. But a little planning up front will prevent a lot of that. So with some species, we can, sod it or plug it, or you can sod about any species of grass, including fescue. Plugging and sprigging, that's just for Bermuda and Zoysia, our warm season grasses. So that's really not an option for fescue. Fescue, most of the time, we look at seeding instead of sodding. Sodding is an expensive way to do it, but don't underestimate the cost. If you have a washout, or you got to go back and reseed a few areas, or what have you, if you have a small lawn, sodding might be a pretty feasible way to do a renovation. And you have to get with your local extension agent to talk a little more about the details of sodding and the cost involved and so forth. But with a small lawn, economically, that may be the way to go. Most of us, however, are looking at seeding as an option. So if we talk about establishment methods, we talked about sprigging and sodding, but seed is the most general way to do it. And here is a picture of a slit seeder, and I didn't show the whole machine here, but if you'll look, it's got blades here on the bottom, and it's got tubes running down, and up here on top, there's a seed box on top of this machine, and that's where you fill your seed, and it flows down these tubes, and it goes in between these discs that are cutting little slits in the soil and dropping that seed in. Now, the reason I really put this machine up here is because if you decide, okay, we're gonna kill some weeds in our lawn, and we're gonna overseed right after we kill those weeds, and renovate the lawn, then a slit seeder is probably your best way to do it. And you can rent these things at local rental yards, or if you hire professionals, most of those guys are going to be using a slit seeder of some sort, and they're going to go over in two directions, so that you don't have rows of grass coming up, because even though these rows down here are only a couple inches apart, these discs, you still will get rows of seed in bare areas, and they'll show up a little and look a little funny. But if you do it in two directions, it fills in very well and evenly. So this slit seeder is probably one of the best ways to overseed your lawn without really tearing up the whole lawn. Okay, and now I want to stop right here and talk real quick about tearing up the whole lawn. I've had several phone calls over the years in the office about renovating their lawn, and the first reaction is, oh, I bring a tiller in and till it all up. 99% of the time, there's no reason to till up your whole lawn. No reason at all, okay? We want to kill the existing vegetation. If you're doing a total renovation and not just overseeding, then yes, we'll kill everything, but we'll leave a little bit of that vegetative matter there. It holds the soil, and we can slit into it with a slit seeder, okay, and get that seed to soil contact, which is what you have to do. No matter how you do your renovation, the goal should be seed to soil contact. How do we get that seed touching the soil? That's when you're going to have the best results with a seeding project. So you can do total renovation or just overseeding and thickening it up with this slit seeder right here. It does a really good job, and does a great job getting that seed to soil contact. Fertility and weeds during renovation, the importance of phosphorus. I like to talk about that a little bit. There's been several studies over the years from some local universities, or say local, Purdue University and UK, and phosphorus is very important for root development. And I don't like to preach to over apply phosphorus, but let's make sure on our soil sample that we're in the high spectrum of phosphorus in our soil. If you don't have enough phosphorus in a lawn renovation, the seedlings come up a little weak and come up a little slower, and so you really want that at a fairly high level. Water. When we overseed these lawns or totally renovate a lawn and overseed the whole thing, we're down to bare dirt basically. We definitely want to keep that wet. Now, here's the problem is with a big lawn, it's very difficult if you don't have irrigation installed, automatic irrigation, and you're dragging hoses and all that. But new seedlings coming up have virtually no root system, okay? For the first 10 days, they're very few roots. So as they start germinating and coming up, you have to keep the top half inch of that soil pretty moist. And that's very difficult in September. You've got a lot of dry days typically. And that's great because you can monitor how much water, the rain isn't just soaking you day after day after day after day, but at the same time, it's a lot of work to keep a larger lawn moist like that. So that's probably one of our biggest hurdles after we seed is keeping it moist until the grass gets tall enough to have a deeper root system to last a little longer. So we have to start out really watering pretty regularly and light because we don't want water running off everywhere. But as the seedling develops and gets bigger, we're starting to cut that back and start watering deeper and infrequent, like we talked about earlier. Another big important deal is, and I'm going to stop here a little and back up off our PowerPoint a little. When we come in to do a partial renovation or we're going to overseed only, we're not killing everything, but we need to get rid of the weeds, okay? And typically we use herbicides such as 2,4-D to help get rid of the broadleaf weeds in our lawn, like your clovers and your plantains and your dandelions. Don't worry a lot about the crabgrass that we talked about earlier. That crabgrass is going to die here really soon. Okay, as soon as we get the first frost, it dies. So if you have a lot of crabgrass and you're renovating your lawn, I would probably push my renovation more to late September, because sometime the 1st of October that crabgrass dies. So we can slit seed right into the crabgrass and not worry about killing it. And by the time that seed starts germinating, typically our crabgrass has been hit by a little frost, little cool nights, and it's starting to die anyway, okay? So probably my best plan, if we are doing a total renovation or just slit seeding in and thickening up some areas, I would probably spray my lawn with 2,4-D and get rid of any broadleafs if you have broadleafs. And then I would mow my lawn down pretty low, mow it down to 1.5 inches, okay? And that's gonna hurt that crabgrass and open it up a little bit. And then I would slit seed my seed in, and all this is after we check fertility and all that. But slit seed my lawn, okay? 2 directions. And then I would wait for the frost to take out my crabgrass, okay? So that's probably the plan, one part of it after another, to get to the point of where we're seeding and then watching our water and so forth. A little talk about shade real quick. If you've got some shady areas in your lawn, I preach this all the time, but all grasses, I don't care what kind of grass it is, all grasses are full sun plants, okay? They want full sun. Some more than others. I mentioned zoysia grass earlier. Zoysia grass absolutely will not tolerate hardly any shade. It is definitely a full sun plant. Fescue, some of them a little bit more than others, but some, they'll tolerate a little shade, okay? But not a whole lot. You start getting very much at all, and you start getting really thin. And the later the summer goes on, the thinner it is. If you've got some big trees in your lawn and you go outside right now in late August and look under those trees as compared to a full sun area, you're going to see a lot thinner grass under those trees than you do out in the full sun area. So the only grass that actually performs a little better than your turf type tall fescue is one of the fine fescues called creeping red fescue. It does perform significantly better than the turf type tall fescues. So consider, in an area like this picture shows, consider maybe putting creeping red fescue in this whole area right here out to the drip lines of these trees. And that you'll do a little better. I won't promise good, thick, great grass under those trees, because once again, even creeping red fescue is a full sun plant, okay? So we can tip the scales a little, but also realize in the shade that this plant is like a little factory, and it's taking in nutrients and sunlight, and it's photosynthesizing and pumping out some oxygen, and it's doing all of this much slower in the shade than it is in the sun. So typically we don't need to put as much fertilizer on that, not quite as much water most of the time. Ideally, we wouldn't put traffic on it as much because it's not growing as much. So hopefully we'd keep the mower off of that every other week or something like that. It's just not going to tolerate as much stress as out in the full sun areas, okay? And if you manage that shady area like that, you'll likely keep grass on it longer than you would otherwise. Trying to think if I missed anything here. I'm about to the end of the presentation, but I want to go back over real quick the kind of steps. You know, you're going to go out and evaluate your lawn right now. You're going to get a soil sample, find out where your fertility is. You're going to find a seed that you is available, and it's a turf type tall fescue. And you're going to spray your lawn to get rid of the weeds, mainly broadleaf weeds. We're not worried so much about the crabgrass, okay? And then you're going to make a decision. If you have a lot of crabgrass, let's schedule this renovation a little later in the September. It'll do better. And If you don't have crabgrass, you know, start at 1st September, middle of September is fine. And we're going to mow it down a little low, okay? And then we're gonna get seed to soil contact in some way. And I recommend the slit seeder I showed you a picture of right back here. That's gonna get that good seed to soil contact. And then we're gonna monitor our moisture, okay? And as it's germinating and getting going. And a couple other little tidbits, let me see. I get questions a lot on how quick do I mow after the grass comes up. And I always like to see it, you know, if I'm going to set my mowing height at 3.5 inches, I'd like to see it about 4.5 inches before I mow it, okay? And the first time you mow, make sure it's a dry day and it didn't just rain that night, because this grass is pretty fragile in the first 6-8 weeks, okay? So stay off of it as long as you can. And then when you do need to mow, yes, get in there to mow, but let's make sure it's not super moist and all that. And then, you know, mow it regularly after that, and watch for weed problems. If we do have some weeds popping up, which is very likely this fall, you'll have some winter annuals starting to pop and all that, consider applying another application of herbicide to knock those down, because weeds are competition. And we're trying to get our grass to really take over, our preferred plant in our lawn. So if you have a lot of competition popping up, we probably will have to treat again. And then probably one of the most important things I can tell you after a renovation in the spring, you need to really consider putting down a pre-emerge. Because what we did this fall when we renovated is we disturbed the soil a little bit with this slit seeder. And we have encouraged some dormant seed laying there in the ground, most likely crabgrass or goosegrass. You've encouraged that to germinate now this next spring, okay? So we're gonna see a crabgrass problem most likely if you renovate it, if you don't put down pre-emergent in the spring. So definitely plan on that. Other than that, it really is not you know, I talk about all the troubles with turf and all the diseases we might get and insect problems. And I talk about how you got to monitor fertility and stay off of it and keep your blade sharp and all these rules. But grass is really a ubiquitous plant. It grows everywhere. It does pretty good. I also like to preach, you know, keep your expectations where they need to be. Okay. And I usually start out a lot of my turf talks this way is let's prepare you and so you know what to expect. If you're willing to put the resources in it, including labor and money and time, then yes, you can have Augusta National golf course quality grass in your lawn. However, if you're like my mother and you mow it every 12 days and you gripe about taking care of the lawn, then keep your expectations correct and realize a few weeds aren't a big problem. A little thin area isn't a big issue, and keep your expectations where they should be, and that's based on what resources you're able and willing to put into your lawn care. And I also say that, you know, at the end of the summer, if it's failed and you've got dirt again, don't get frustrated. Like I said, this stuff, it's just grass, okay? And we can get a little more seed and we can get it back up to our expectations. And oftentimes Mother Nature throws us a few curveballs in the summer, and we do have failures, even though we did everything we could to keep that lawn looking as good as we can. Very likely it's gonna happen to you eventually if it hadn't already. So contact your extension office and complain to them about how it failed and set a new plan and